learn together. For our class, we're going to study the recreational and literary environment. The social practice is read comics to discuss cultural expression. And the final product for this class is holding a discussion. That means that at the end of this class, you will exchange your opinion about comics with your family, and you are going to argue if you think the comics are good for teens and for children. Do you know genres of comics? What kind of genres of comics do you know? Romance? Comedy? Which others? Let's check someone. Superhero. Superhero comics are one of the most common genres of American comic books. Superhero comics feature stories about superheroes and the universes these characters inhabit. Comic books devoted to superheroes, heroic people with extraordinary or superhuman abilities and skills, or godlike powers and attributes, ballooned into a widespread genre coincident with the beginnings of World War II and the end of the Great Depression. Is this familiar to you? Have you read sometimes any kind of topic like this? Any kind of comic like this? Let's check another one. The manga. Is this familiar to you? Do you know another name for the manga? Maybe the anime? Manga are comics or graphic novels created in Japan or by creators in the Japanese language, conforming to a style developed in Japan in the late 19th century. One characteristic of this kind of comic is that all the characters have very, very large eyes and just a little movement in the lips. We have another genre, the slice of life. Many comics and graphic novels offer thoughtful portrayals of real life. This can take the form of autobiography, relationship drama, or historical fiction, among other examples. Slice of life comics are frequently popular with older teenagers and adults in search of a contemplative read. Is this familiar to you? That means that it's a relationship between people in real life. Humor. There are plenty of comics that live up to the name comic, from Mad Magazine to Simpsons comics to editorial cartoons. Comics are a great avenue for exaggeration, satire, and just plain ridiculousness. Is this comic familiar to you? Have you seen it? I'm sure that you can find it in a newspaper. Maybe your parents have read this kind of comic. Ask them, please, and write your notes. Do you know the name of this comic? We're going to look the name of this comic later. Now we have nonfiction. Comics have proven to be a great educational tool, and many have been created to explore such diverse topics as science, history, politics, and biography. Is this familiar to you? Do you know this genre? Science fiction and fantasy. Those who like to imagine other worlds will find a multitude of fantastic universes to explore in comics. Is this more familiar to you? Did you read comics like this? Do you know name of different comics of this genre? Now we have another one, horror. Frights, chills and thrills abound in comics with creepy illustrations and suspense-building stories. Do you know this genre? Now, please write, which genre is the most appropriate for children and teens? I'm going to ask you, please write your own ideas. What do you think about this? Do you think that children could read any kind of comic? Why? Do you think they are able to understand all the vocabulary in this kind of comics? Like in the last one, in the horror, Maybe like in the science fiction fantasy? Do you think teens can understand them? Or also children like 5 to 8 years? Okay, please, now write your ideas. Now we're going to check different elements in a comic strip, but before we must to classify the genres of these comic strips. Please pay attention and look at the screen. We have 4 different comics. In the first one, this comic has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 panels. In each panel, you can find different information about a character that is very known in all the world. In the second comic, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 panels. In the first panel, we have just the name of the cartoon or the comic strip. And in the others, we have only just one panel with speech bubble and text. Can you find it? Do you know those elements? Okay. For the next one, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 panels. In those panels, you can find the scenes with drawings, texts, and the name of the cartoon or the comic strip. And for the last one, we have a very big picture and then 2 little panels. We have on the top the name of the comic strip. Now we must to classify them or label each comic using the words in the box. The first one says horror. The next one is humor. The next one, superheroes. And the next one, real life. Do you know the answers? Is anybody here that wants to participate to answer? Do you want to come to the front? Do you want to write on the screen? No? Okay, here I don't have anybody that wants to participate. So we're going to say the right answers. For the first one, here you have a comic with a very known character, Superman. So, do you think it is about horror? No. Do you think it is about humor? No. Do you think it's about superheroes? Yes, that's the right answer. If you wrote that answer, please put a tick for yourself. For the next one, we have a cartoon or a comic strip about Garfield. Do you know which one is the right? I have here some people that wants to participate with me. Okay, they are saying that the number 2. Do you think humor is the right one? No? Horror? Real life? Which one do you think is the right one for Garfield? Okay, if you wrote humor, that's the right answer. Let's go with the third comic. We have a comic with people that are at home, interacting, having a conversation. So, what is it representing? Is it about horror? Is it about humor? No. The right answer is only a thought. Its stem, it's made of bubbles. You can see it in the picture of the panel where is Garfield. He is thinking in that moment. He is thinking, it had better. It points at the brain of the character who is thinking. Pay attention to this kind of bubble. In the first one, we said that the speech balloon is oval, and at the end, the stem points to the mouth of the character. For this one, for the thought balloon, it is pointing to the brain of the character because it represents that the character is thinking something. Sometimes you can find it also when a character is sleeping, and it represents what that character is dreaming. You can find the thought balloon with a cloud and little bubbles above it. Now, pay attention. We have the thoughts of the characters. I'm going to go again with the scream bubbles. Beside of the screams of a character, you can find the scream bubbles when you want to write a sound effect or an onomatopoeia. As you want to represent a sound very loud, you will use letters in a very large size, and you are going to write them with a lot of color and also with this kind of bubbles, the scream bubbles with zigzag shape. Now pay attention please to this comic strip. We have another important element, the caption. The caption is also called description box because it tells the readers what's happening in the story, what's happening in the comic strip. Do you know this comic strip? Maybe you can find them in the newspaper. You can ask to your parents if they have read this kind of comic strip. And in this picture, you can find different captions. As you can see, the caption could be on the top of a frame, but also they can appear on the last part of a frame. I mean below. The caption is going to describe what is happening in all the comic strip, but it is going to appear frame by frame, I mean panel by panel. You are going to find captions in the most part of the panels because there are a narrative in each panel. Now, I'm going to ask you to use your notebook and write this activity. You're going to draw your favorite comic strip character. Think about all the comic strips that you have read and think about who is your favorite character of a comic strip. You will write a name. You can begin your sentence using a phrase like, my favorite comic character is, and you can write something like Superman, Batman, and some others. Which one is your favorite? Write it, please. Besides to write the name, you are going to draw all the character and try to give all the characteristics that makes that character important to you. I mean, if it is powerful, try to draw it. If it is a villain, maybe try to draw why you think it's a villain, what is its main characteristic, and color it. At the end, you're going to write some information about your favorite comic strip. What kind of information are you going to write? First, you must write the name of the protagonist. I mean, the main character of your story, the main character of your comic strip. Then, you're going to write the name of the antagonist. Pay attention to this because there are some people that prefers the antagonist beside the protagonist. So you're going to write the name of both protagonist and antagonist of your story. Also, I'm going to ask you to write secondary characters. I mean the characters that are not too important as the main one. Then you must describe the setting. What is the setting? The setting is the place where the story happens. And you must use a lot of adjectives to describe this place because people who is going to read your comic strip must understand all the scene, all the setting. Then I'm going to ask you to write some information, additional information about your story. Where does it happen? What's happening in that story? Which kind of characters are there in that comic strip? And at the end, when you finish, you are going to share it with your family. I'm going to suggest you something. To begin with this comic strip, you are going to use a sheet, and in that sheet, you can draw all the panels that you want. First, you must decide if you want to use only one panel, two, or more. When you decide the number of panels that you are going to use, you must draw them. You're going to use a ruler. And then you must decide what are you going to describe in each panel. What are you going to draw and say about the story in each panel. If you are sure about what you are going to draw and what you are going to draw for all the characteristics of this comic strip, you can begin, and at the end, only check if you have included all the elements. What are the elements, or which are the elements of the comic strip? The first one that we said was the frame or the panel. Then we talk about the speech bubbles, okay? Also, you can give a little space between each panel or each frame. If you decide to add captions in each frame, you must describe what is happening in each scene. You must be very attentive about what you are going to write and what kind of adjectives you will use in your description. Then you must decide if the characters are speaking or just thinking, and then you will decide if you are going to use speech bubbles or thought bubbles. Before to do that, also you must decide if you are going to add a title on the top or maybe in another part of the comic. Remember, not always you are going to find the topic or the name of your comic strip on the first panel. You can decide where to write the topic or the name of your comic strip. And when you do that, you're going to use a very large letter, attractive letter with color, and then you are going to describe in the other panels with the same kind of letter in speech bubbles and thought bubbles what are happening in that scenes. Also, I want to remind you, about the zigzag bubbles that you are going to use to scream, that you are going to use to represent a sound very loud. You can include them to make more attractive your comic strip, okay? We're going to make a pause and then we come back.
Transmite simultáneamente a través de Facebook, YouTube y Twitter. Síguenos. Regresamos. Esto es Escuela TV.
Sigue viendo Escuela TV. Productores, campesinos, comerciantes y chefs reconocen en este espacio las bondades de uno de los productos mexicanos más picantes.
Tenemos el chile ancho, tenemos el chilacate, que mucha gente lo combina para...
A puro chile. Sábado y domingo, 10:30 de la mañana. Canal 28.
Hola, ¿cómo están? Me da mucho gusto darles la bienvenida nuevamente a un episodio más de
El cuidado de las especies es importante. Por eso este espacio comparte contigo las situaciones que nuestras mascotas pueden presentar. Hospital Veterinario. Miércoles 4:30 de la tarde. Sábado y domingo 11 de la mañana. Canal 28. A lo largo del día, tu vida busca un nivel lleno de música, aplicaciones y, claro, videojuegos. Y tu nivel debe ser nivel 5. Viernes 5 de la tarde y sábado 10 de la mañana. Canal 28. Su lucha se remite a un número, sus recuerdos a una mujer y su esperanza a un mensaje. Diles que escape. El prisionero. Jueves y domingo 10 de la noche. Canal 28. Canal 28. La televisión de todos.
Esto es Escuela TV. Continuamos. Escuela TV. Primer grado. Secundaria.
Okay, let's continue with the class. We're going to review what we have learned until this moment. What did we say about the comic strip at the beginning of this class? We were talking about the genres. Do you remember the genres of a comic strip? Well, we have talked about superhero. We talked about the comic strip that includes different characters with superpowers also. But the superhero, it's a comic strip that includes characters that maybe fight for a reason, for a common reason. Then we talked about the manga, this kind of anime that you know and that I'm sure that it's very familiar to you. In the manga, we said that the characteristic of the characters, the main characteristics are that these characters have very large eyes and just a little movement of the lips. Then we talk about the slice of life. This kind of genre includes situations of the real life, of the daily life, like anything that you live every day in your family at home. If you pay attention to this kind of genre, in this comic strip that has 4 panels, you can read the text. It says, "Hey, Ma, look at this." And then she is looking at the same screen that her son and said, "Brad and Angelina are apparently getting a divorce." And in the 3rd panel, we can see her saying, "So, this is news now. Who cares about people? You don't even personally know." And at the end, she appears sitting in front of a television and screaming, "No, son, don't say yes. He's just using you for your money." And that means she is doing the same thing that her son. Those are examples of real life. Then we talked about humor. In humor, we can find this comic strip with 3 panels. In the first panel, she is saying, "That's quite a sandwich, honey." And he answers, "And it's too much beautiful to eat." He says, "Beauty is in the eye of the beholder." And at the end, she asks him, "Where's your sandwich?" And he says, "Beauty is now in the stomach of the beholder." That's just for humor. Then we talked about nonfiction. Can you say the name of different characters of nonfiction? Do you know the names of different characters? Write them please in your notebook. Also, we talked about science fiction. I'm sure you like science fiction because you have studied this topic in your English and in your Spanish subject. In this genre, you can find different elements that makes you think about other planets or something like that. Then we talked about the horror. This is another kind of genre that I'm sure someone in your family can enjoy this genre. Then we talked about the levels of the different comics. We made an exercise. We are going to review the answers. We talked about the horror, the humor, the superheroes, and real life. But also, there are some other genres that maybe I didn't include here in this presentation. Do you know what another genres of comic strip? I'm sure you do. Do you know romance? Do you know comedy? Comedy is very similar to the humor genre. Here, I didn't include romance. What about if you make a comic strip about romance? Do you like to do it? Do you like to write a story about maybe you, like the main character, like the protagonist, and another person in that story, and you can say something related to the romance genre? Then we talked about the elements of the comic strip. The first one was the comic book cover. Pay attention to this. Not all the comics are inside of a comic book. This is a comic book, and for this reason, it has a cover. But there are a lot of comic strips that you can find in the newspaper, so they are not going to have a cover. Then we talked about the panels. Do you remember what are the panels? The panels are the frames in a story. The frames can have a different shape and different size. That is going to be up to you and up to the author. Here in this image, we can find a comic strip, and I would like to point out to the parts of the comic strip. Pay attention, please, on the screen. In this comic strip, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 panels. We can name them panels or frames, like in this part is saying, frames or panels. In some of the comic strip, we can find this little space between the panels, but not all the comic strips are going to have them, okay? Also, we can find the topic or the title on the first part of the comic strip. But there are comic strips where you can find the title on the other part, I mean in the second panel, or in another part in the center of the comic strip, okay? It is not an exclusive place to write the title of the top of the comic strip. Then we have the speech bubbles. The speech bubbles, remember, points to the character that is talking. Beside of the speech bubbles, in some other comic strips, we can find thought bubbles. We said that the thought bubbles are very similar to the speech bubbles, but the difference is that it is not a novel, like in this one. This is a novel. And the thought bubble, it's like a cloud. It has a shape of a cloud, and then it has little bubbles that are pointing to the brain of the main character or of the character that is saying or thinking the dialogue. Then we have, in this side, the characters. The main characters for this cartoon or for these comic strips are Garfield and John. And also, I ask you to remember the name of the secondary character that is not in this comic strip, and that it's Audie. Well, let's continue. Then we talked about the sound effects or the onomatopoeias. I told you that you can find them in very large letters, attractive letters with a lot of color, and the most part of the times you can find them inside of bubbles that are going to have the shape of zigzag, as you can pay attention and you can look them in the screen. Then we were paying attention to the different kind of comic strips. Here you have different examples of comic strips that has only one panel or another with 4 or more panels. We describe the definition of the main elements in the comic strip. Remember, there are some other elements that are not going to be present in all the comic strip, like the gutter. And the last part was making your drawing about your favorite comic. Do you have in this moment the drawing of your favorite comic, your comic strip, or your favorite character? I asked you, a little while ago, I asked you to make a drawing about your favorite character. I expect you have finished it. Did you write the right information? Did you write who is the protagonist for your story? In your story, is there an antagonist? Did you write the name of the secondary characters? How many secondary characters are in your story? Do you remember the number of characters in the Garfield story? We have John, Garfield, and Odie. How many characters are there? There are 3 characters. And then, in your story, how many characters are? Think about it and write the answers. The setting, remember, this is another important element of your comic strip because it describes the place in which the story happens. So, I ask you, did you write what is the setting of the comic strip that are you going to write? Remember that the achievement or the expected learning for this class is holding a discussion, not only making or creating a comic strip. In the next class, we're going to create a comic strip, but first, you must hold or have a discussion with your family. What does it mean? It means that you are going to talk to your family about the comics. You are going to give your opinion and ask them their opinion. You are going to think about the vocabulary inside of the panels, inside the speech bubbles, and inside the comic strip, and you must decide if they are good to teach to children and teens, because we have said that comic strip, it's an educational tool. So think about it, discuss it with your family, talk about what kind of genres do you prefer. If you prefer comedy, anime, or manga, or some other, and ask to your parents which one is their favorite genre of comic strip. When you finish your discussion, when you finish your conversation, because a discussion doesn't mean that you are going to fight. You're going to have a conversation, a discussion about opinions. You're going to write all the elements that you can decide important for this work, and then you're going to write your own elements for the comic strip. Okay, I want to say thank you for your attention. I would like to apologize if I had any kind of mistake. This is a new experience for me. I expect you have enjoyed the class, and I expect you have learned a lot. Goodbye.
Escuela TV se transmite por Vive FM en los municipios de Anáhuac, Sabinas, Cerralbo, Montemorelos, Linares, Galeana y Doctor Arroyo. Regresamos. Esto es Escuela TV.
Continuación, Escuela TV. Canal 28, la televisión de todos. La mejor oportunidad para que nuestros niños recorran el país es una aventura que genera participación y le ayuda a reconocer nuestra cultura. la lleva México. Martes y jueves, 4:30 de la tarde. Sábado y domingo, 8:30 de la mañana. Canal 28.